of 1620, The Zone. Ravi Lulla.
He talks basketball on 1620 The Zone. His name's Ravi Lulla, and he's on the phone. Ravi Lulla. Ravi Lulla. He is here to talk Creighton basketball.
And this week, to show us the gun show.
Yep.
As promised last week, Ravi said he would do this week's interview live on Stibbs TV, which you can watch right now on youtube.com. If you're not already a subscriber, we've tweeted out the link from the J-Tech Construction Zone Twitter feed. Meow. Ravi has gone tank top today.
I have.
And so the gun show is open.
Well, and I told you which one it was going to be too. I'll stand up for a second.
Yeah. Let's take a look here. Let's say.
Hallowed be thy gains. Oh, he's got a blender bottle too. Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it's the whole thing. It's the
that's
whole thing.
Great.
Yeah.
I wonder how different Jesus would have been if he were yoked. I mean, he was already pretty darn powerful. But
you seen a crucifix? He pretty much was.
Well, I know. Well, yeah, but I mean, like on the T-shirt.
Yeah.
Maybe his enemies wouldn't have been so callous towards him.
Yeah, I mean the white Catholic crucifix Jesus is really more of like a CrossFit body, where this is more like a bodybuilding Jesus that we have on the shirt here. So
kind of looks like he could be like a marathon runner or something.
Yeah, it's like he's very lean, a lot of definition, but not
doing
much
multiple
bulk.
reps. He's not putting a ton of weight on the bar. He's just doing a lot of reps.
Yeah, he's more of an endurance athlete in the white Catholic version of Jesus. So
basketball, huh?
Stibbs getting uncomfortable. Stibbs of the Catholic education getting uncomfortable here. This is a first.
I just don't want it. I just don't want yoked Jesus to be the thing that gets us kicked off the air finally.
Listen. I got no room to talk. Yoked or not yoked, he was still in much better shape than me. So
Samesies.
Yeah. So I said I was going to hold back some of this audio, and I want to play here. This is the second part of Paul Feinbaum today on ESPN's morning show, and the subject was on the Pac-12 conference and whether or not if the Pac-12 doesn't start with everybody else, or because of a variety of different reasons, maybe doesn't play at all while the South and the Midwest are playing. This I thought was rather interesting because I think it speaks to the core of what a lot of college athletics has become, and that is it's dog eat dog.
I think it's free agency, Greeny, and I think it's probably already going on. If you're sitting down there at Clemson or Alabama or Florida or Georgia or Michigan, and you're thinking, I've got a shot at picking off some of the better players in the country, you are going to do it. And it's not like the Pac-12 was healthy anyway. I mean, this program is already a mess. It barely shows up on the radar screen. Last year, Oregon and Utah had a shot, and they both lost late in the season. I think they've only been to the college football playoff twice. So this is a conference that really can't afford to miss this season. But right now, based on what everyone's saying, they're in big danger, and players exiting is the worst possible thing.
And, obviously he's talking from a football sense, but basketball obviously can be affected too. So I just open up the conversation. I mean, we already think that there's tampering going on anyway. You got the transfer portal. The ability to move from school to school has become easier, not more difficult. If a conference like the Pac-12, sits it out this year or is highly limited, could you see a scenario where the big dogs eat the little dogs?
I mean, I was under the impression the Pac-12 had been sitting out the playoff era entirely based on previous performance. But no, I mean, yeah, that's what's going to happen. If they can't play, you're probably going to have some sort of, I would guess, special one-time waiver situation that if they want to stay at school, it doesn't count against their eligibility this year. And because, I mean, they wouldn't be playing, so technically it shouldn't. And maybe they just pause the clock on their eligibility for the year. But for the guys that want to play this year, yeah, they're going to go to the bigger schools. And I mean, you're going to have a pretty good shot at a waiver since it's an unprecedented pandemic that has forced you to transfer from your current location. So yeah, I think the big dogs are, and honestly, all of the dogs are just going to pick the carcass of the Pac-12, whether it's big dogs, little, everybody. It's just wherever they can fit in. Maybe Akron's going after the third string tailback at USC instead of the starter, but they're still going to go sniffing around. I think it's going to be a complete just dissemination of the entire Pac-12 conference, which, it doesn't have that far to go. Let's be honest. They've been pretty awful in football for the last several years.
Do you think, Ravi, that this is going to affect recruiting? Because I was asked that question last night by a listener, and my answer was no, because in theory, this is a one season problem or a one calendar season problem versus a long-term effect. Do you think I'm right in that, or could you see something wrong with that opinion, and perhaps it could affect the Pac-12 from a negative perspective?
Yeah, I think it could. I don't know. I don't know if it will, but the only real precedent we have of a team taking an entire season off is SMU. Obviously, it's for a lot of different reasons.
Sure.
But that decimated that program almost to this day. We're talking about almost 40 years now where they've had a handful of winning seasons and a handful of bowl appearances, and all of those have occurred in the last 10 years, basically. Before that, you had 30 years of nothingness at SMU. So maybe not that dramatic since it's not a scandal and the death penalty and all that, but I do think you would have. I do think there is an effect of just not having a sports or football in particular, not having football for a year. I don't think you can go on from that without some sort of negative ramifications.
Yeah, I would imagine that. Listen, it's a conference that's already taken a hit. They haven't been in as many playoffs as everybody else. It's the part of the country that kind of gets ignored because of the time of games. They were so concerned about the game times that there was talk of moving games into the morning so that they could play in the early window and get more national coverage on Fox. I don't think there's any question it would have an effect on recruiting, because I can guarantee you, for example, let's just say it's Nebraska. Nebraska goes out there and recruits from Arizona and from California all the time. Imagine if they can say, hey, man, remember 2020? We played football. Are these guys really that committed to football? We are. We're going to play come hell or high water, and you never know what's going to happen out here. I would think it would have a fairly sizable impact on recruiting. I'm not saying everybody would, pack up and head west or head east, but I don't think there's any question there will be an impact on recruiting.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I think it's, again, I don't think it would be nearly as dramatic as an SMU situation, but kind of like what happened with SMU, the pieces were starting to fall apart before the death penalty. Like, they were starting to erode before the hammer came down. And so in this instance, missing an entire football season in 2020 would be the hammer. But you've seen the erosion of Pac-12 football for the last several years, as we talked about. So I don't think this would be solely responsible for it, but I do think you'd have a lasting effect in both recruiting and on-field performance, of where they just have a hard time competing in either arena moving forward for at least the next several years.
Ravi, yesterday we had Todd Furman on, and we were talking about lines being set, win totals being set, with the idea that there will be no fans at sporting events. And, John and I talked about it a little bit later on in the show as well. And the idea of players that are, who feed off of either the negative or the positive energy from the crowd, how will they adapt? And it got me thinking about Creighton, a team that is very experienced coming into the 2020-2021 season, has a lot of aspirations. If there are no crowds or limited crowds at Bluejay home games, how do you think that will affect the Jays, positive or negatively? Or do you think that it will be pretty neutral in its overall effect on them throughout the course of the season?
I think it'll have a negative effect. You saw at times last year, whether it was the Seton Hall game or Butler at home, there were multiple games last year where I think the team got the momentum rolling, and the crowd certainly helped push the opponent all the way off the cliff there. And so I do think it would have an overall negative effect, especially in the big games. In some of the earlier seasons, some of the not as the not as sexy conference games. John, there's not always great crowds for those games, especially like a Tuesday night at 8:00. for a tip off. Like those aren't always awesome games and awesome atmospheres, but when you've got those, like the Seton Hall game is a perfect example. Maybe they beat Seton Hall without the crowd, but I felt like the crowd was a factor in that game, in the way it played out. So I do think overall it would be a negative impact. I think Creighton, while sometimes their home court advantage can be overstated in the everyday in and out games, in big games, I don't think it's overstated at all. I do think the crowd has a pretty major impact. That being said, I think there's other schools around the country, Duke, for example, that would have a much larger negative impact than Creighton, because you've got the fans are right on top of you. They're there for every single game, non-conference, conference, whatever it is. So I don't think Creighton would be the hardest hit by that, but I do think it would have an overall negative impact.
Ravi Lulla, our pregame show host for Bluejay Shootaround, joining us here on 1620 The Zone. We're also streaming live on Stibbs TV if you want to take a peek. It was about an hour after we had you on last Thursday that we got word of Radi Andronikashvili and the commitment from the Georgia native, the country Georgia, not the state.
Not the Bulldogs.
Obviously. Yeah, not the Bulldogs. But I'm curious what you think. I mean, as a player, he's more of a slasher. He does a lot of his scoring at the rim. His three-point shooting is okay, but probably not at the same level as Creighton has been used to from its guards. He certainly, from the scouting reports, has, passing is a big strength of his. They can play. I mean, he's considered a 1, but they can play him at the 2. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty excited about the commitment. He's one of the top international prospects in the class this year, and he reminds me of if Jason Williams, White Chocolate, had been born in Eastern Europe in the year 20, like in, the early 20th or like 21st century. Like that's what he reminds me of. Like that's Roddy's game. It's super flashy. There's a lot of the no look passes, a lot of the like overstated fakes and that type of thing. But it works. It's a very effective game. And I think he's got what I think Bill Simmons calls the passing gene. He's got that like supernatural passing ability where he just finds guys wherever they are. And I have to imagine that the guys he's going to find on Creighton are more talented than the ones he's finding on the U20 Georgia national team. I hope, at least. And so I think he's going to fit in really well with Creighton. Obviously, he's got to shore up the jumper a little bit, but I mean, it's not like Maurice Watson was a knockdown 3-point shooter. It's not like Austin Chapman was when he played with Doug, but his senior year wasn't really either. I mean, really the only guy that's really been an incredible knockdown shooter at the point guard position of recent years is Marcus Zagorowski. So, and he's still going to be here this upcoming year, at least. I don't know if we're going to get him for his senior season, but this appears to be the heir apparent at the point guard spot once Marcus Zagorowski leaves either next year or the year after.
Ravi, you are like me in that you love gambling on sporting events. We've had no sporting events for the most part to gamble on. Are you going to dip your toes into Bundesliga soccer?
I don't think so. I did watch a Korean baseball organization game the other night.
Nice.
So that was interesting. I haven't gambled on anything. I guess, I mean, I don't really miss it, I guess. And for me, a lot of it is gambling is just the proof that I'm smarter than everybody else. And so when it's something I don't know anything about, I don't really feel the attraction to it. I don't necessarily go in just for the action. But listen, if we go a longer prolonged amount of time, I might start diving in and becoming a little bit more of a subject matter expert on Bundesliga.
Yeah, I think that is a part of wagering that, is lost. We think of it as just having the action or having something to root for or against in a game. But there is an element of when I'm right, yeah, the monetary gain is nice, but it's almost as good to just be able to say, yeah, I called that one right. And if you're just randomly throwing money at something that you're not interested in or have very little knowledge in, I don't know if you really get all of that satisfaction of, I knew that all along. Well, you actually didn't. You just kind of took a lucky guess. So, yeah, I could see it for not just you, but a lot of gamblers. We talked to Todd Furman yesterday. He said he can count the number of bets that he's made in the last 2 months on one hand. And now he looks at it more from an investment standpoint.
Sure.
and a long term, hey, I'm trying to make money at this as an avocation.
Yeah,
But,
professional gambler, basically. Yeah.
But there is an element of the ego of knowing that I studied this, I know what's going to happen, I'm right.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it for me, I would say probably 90% of it for me is just having like an actual physical receipt of like, I called this, like I was right. I got good odds, or like I got good odds on this. I saw value where somebody else did, whether it's being right about the spread or the winner, or just, being right about New England coming back in the Super Bowl down 25 points, like whatever the case is. Like I like having the physical, like it's just a receipt. Like it's a receipt saying I was right. The money's nice, obviously. And there's times where if I'm going to watch a game anyway, or like I watched the Super Bowl with Josh at the down at the book, and I probably would have put money on Kansas City, but I'm a 49ers fan. And if the 49ers won the Super Bowl, I wanted to win money on them winning the Super Bowl. Like that would have been fun for me. And I didn't care that I lost the bet, because it's like, oh, they lost the game. That sucks, whatever. But if they won, I wanted to have money to prove, I wanted to cash in on it.
You wanted a celebration of fandom and of money.
Exactly.
Well.
So, I mean, a lot of it for me, like I'll do parlays and stuff. Like I don't look at it as like a serious investment, because if I did, I would never do parlays basically ever. But yeah, for me, for the most part, it's just mostly being able to have physical evidence that I was right and you were wrong.
That's funny, Ravi, because I did the exact opposite of you when my team was last in the Super Bowl. I bet more money than I probably could afford on the Panthers, in knowing that if the Broncos won, I'm more than willing to pay that amount of money in order for a Super Bowl win. But if they lost, at least I had X amount of dollars, and while I was sad.
Yeah, but you're a way bigger Broncos fan than I am a 49ers fan. Like I like the 49ers, but like
Very
it doesn't. I mean, I came in the next day and did a 4-hour radio show with Josh dissecting the 49ers losing, and like you would have killed yourself. Like you couldn't have done that.
Yeah,
so,
you're right. Hedging my feelings costs a lot more than hedging your feelings. So.
Yeah, and like, listen, I didn't particularly enjoy that show. I disliked it more than I thought I was going to, but it still didn't like affect my mood. I was just like, that's a bummer, and talking about it for 4 extra hours
like it either.
did not help.
If it makes you feel any better, I was not a fan of that show or week or this year in general.
That's true. Down with 2020.
It was a preview, Stibbs, of everything to come, so at least it prepared you.
At least it couldn't get any worse for Stibbs and the Chiefs winning the Super Bowl.
I'm the most prepared man on this earth for this pandemic.
He doesn't have any ramen, but his heart has already been hardened from the Chiefs winning a Super Bowl.
Ravi Lulla joins us on Thursdays. Ravi, thanks. Appreciate it. And now you can get back to hanging and banging on the weights.
Clanging and banging, not hanging and banging. That's a different.
Well, I mean, some people like to hang. Some people like
hang clean.
Hang clean. That's true.
Yeah, hanging and banging happens like during Netflix and chilling. Not
yes.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
That's different.
That's a different activity. Maybe after the workout.
Oh, there you go.
Thanks, Ravi.
Thanks,
Bye,
guys.
Ravi.
You bet. Ravi Lulla of Bluejay Shootaround joining us here on Unsportsmanlike Conduct.
And he's a Thursday guy now, right, Stibbs? This is his new weekly spot?
Yes.
He's a
2:30?
Thursday man.
Nice. Thursday man now. I want to thank Lazarus Investments for sponsoring that segment. Lazarus Investments, another great local client, and we appreciate their support of us here on 1620 The Zone. One notable Major League pitcher is not a fan of playing ball this year. If playing ball means he's going to have to take a pay cut. We will have some of that audio and more as we continue on Unsportsmanlike Conduct in 1620 The Zone.
Bye, YouTube. We'll see you tomorrow.